Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for your appearing before the committee today. To reiterate, the bill that we're talking about today, the National Environmental Policy Act, is one of our nation's bedrock environmental laws, crafted on a bipartisan basis by Congress, signed into law by President Nixon. This committee having played a very important role. NEPA has informed federal decision-making and increased transparency for over 40 years. It is the starting point for evaluating the environmental impacts of federal action. NEPA does not dictate decision-making or project choices, nor does it require federal agencies to elevate environmental concerns above all others. Instead, it simply makes sure that agencies have all the necessary information on potential environmental impacts and consider alternatives before moving forward with a federal project. To put it simply, NEPA makes sure we, quote, look before we leap, unquote, and are using our taxpayer dollars wisely. It's also one of the primary ways through which the public is able to participate in the federal decision-making process, fulfilling the fundamental right of American citizens to have a voice regarding a proposed federal project. We hear much on this committee about the conflict between states and the federal government, but in essence, NEPA ensures that the federal government is a good neighbor, giving its neighbors a chance to be heard on federal actions. So I strongly support the administration's efforts to better incorporate the impacts of climate change in the NEPA review process. Climate change is a critical generational issue that we cannot ignore. The proposed guidance that we are discussing today will increase predictability and certainty for federal agencies, state and local governments, not least the Defense Department, private businesses, and the public on how climate change impacts will be considered as part of NEPA. Our federal courts have also overwhelmingly determined that this is something that we need to do. So, Mr. Clark, I want to thank you for appearing before this committee today and sharing your expertise. As Ms. Bordallo is, I am also a member of the Armed Services Committee, so I particularly appreciated the fact that in your testimony you stated that the Army considers the impacts of sea level rise, storm surge, and increasing frequency of drought when studying where and how to build facilities. I know when I first went on to that committee, I was very impressed with the ways in which the different services were really in leadership positions of taking into account the impacts of climate change. And it is my hope, as you referenced in your testimony, that as they deal with this through the NEPA process, that they will create templates for other agencies to follow. But from your experience, having served in both Republican and Democratic administrations, if we don't conduct careful planning, could the impacts of climate change negatively impact military readiness? We know that they do certainly deal with it in a national security framework, but could it impact military readiness?
Well, the Army is doing a number of those studies now, and one of the things that they are concerned about is operations and training about whether or not climate change can impact that. So, yes, they are taking that into account, and I would also refer you to the study that the Army did, I think in 2012, about the vulnerability of the Army.
And you also said in your testimony that CEQ's guidance will, quote, help bring structure and consistency, unquote, and, quote, reduce confusion, unquote, for the Army's current efforts. Can you expand on this? Can you give some examples of confusion under the current process that could be improved by increased guidance from CEQ?
Well, I'd like to answer that by giving some experience. When I was at CEQ, when I first came to CEQ, I came to the Secretary of the Army's office, and I was asked to put together a cumulative effects guidance. And that had much of the same discussion that we're having now, that this was going to create new law, it was going to create more stoppages of projects and all that sort of stuff. But what was really going on was that the agencies were getting sued, and the agencies were begging CEQ for guidance. It was not an easy thing to do, but we did put together a framework, and I think that's the major contribution of this, to put together a framework that agencies can work with.
So it creates consistency across the agencies, which is what you're saying?
Yes, ma'am.
Great, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you.